Finally, a bit of brighter news, this time from the deep sea. Off the coast of Antarctica, deep underwater, researchers have discovered the British ship called Endurance, the vessel that launched one of the most remarkable stories of survival and determination.
When those words aired in 2022, few realized the magnitude of what had just been found. Beneath 10,000 feet of black, freezing water, sealed away for more than a century, lay one of the greatest ghost stories in exploration. A wooden ship crushed by ice in 1915, now resting intact on the seafloor, its name still glowing faintly through the dark, Endurance.
It hasn't been seen in over 100 years. This is the Endurance, resting nearly 10,000 feet down in the dark, freezing waters at the bottom of Antarctica's Weddell Sea.
The world saw the headlines, but what the cameras couldn't capture was the silence that surrounded her. A silence so deep that even the sea anemones drifting nearby seemed to guard her memory. It wasn't just a discovery, it was a resurrection. A ship lost to history had returned, perfectly preserved by the very ice that once destroyed her. Every bolt, every beam, every letter on her stern told the same story of courage, endurance, and the thin line between survival and surrender. But to understand why this moment shook the world, why a single name etched in ice could bring explorers to tears more than 100 years later, we have to journey back to the beginning of Shackleton's impossible dream. Wind intensifies, fade to sepia map of Antarctica, 1914. This is where Endurance set sail and where legend began. In 1914, the world was at the edge of war, but at the edge of the earth, another kind of battle was beginning. A British explorer named Sir Ernest Shackleton was preparing to attempt something no one had ever done before, to cross the entire Antarctic continent from sea to sea through the coldest, most hostile landscape on the planet. He called it the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. His ship would be his pride, a three-masted wooden vessel built to withstand the southern ice. Her name was Endurance, and in her name lay the spirit of everyone who would sail aboard her. 27 men joined him, sailors, scientists, photographers, carpenters, cooks. Each one handpicked for skill and resilience, each one knowing that once they entered the Antarctic Circle, there would be no turning back. They brought with them supplies, sled dogs, and a hope that history would remember them as the first to conquer the White Continent. At first, the sea was calm. The Endurance cut through the cold blue waters, her sails heavy with purpose. But as they neared the Weddell Sea, something began to change. The horizon hardened, sheets of ice thickened into walls, and soon the ship was surrounded, locked in by an expanding kingdom of frozen glass. Each day, Shackleton and his crew hacked, pushed, and fought to free the ship. But Antarctica had other plans. The ice tightened its grip, moving with the patience of mountains. Even when the wind stopped, the pressure beneath the surface never ceased, bending the wooden hull until it moaned like a living thing in pain. They were trapped. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The men lived aboard a ship that could no longer move, drifting helplessly with the ice, watching as the world turned to white. Shackleton kept them busy, routine, discipline, humor. He knew that order could be the difference between survival and collapse. They hunted seals for meat, played soccer on the ice, and held on to hope with frozen fingers. Yet every night they could hear the low groan of the Endurance echoing through the dark, the sound of a ship slowly being crushed to death. By October 1915, the Endurance could bear no more. The hull split, the deck caved. Men scrambled for their lifeboats as icy water poured in. Shackleton watched in silence. He later wrote, "She is crushed beyond hope of ever being righted. She is gone." And with that, the Endurance slipped beneath the ice, swallowed whole by the sea she dared to cross. The dream of conquest had become a struggle to survive. But even as their ship disappeared into the black water, Shackleton stood unbroken. He turned to his men and said quietly, "Ship and stores have gone. Now we must go home." In that moment, a new expedition began, one that would not chase glory, but life itself. Trapped on the ice with no ship, no radio, and no rescue in sight, Shackleton and his men now faced a different kind of enemy: time. The Endurance was gone, All that remained were 28 men, 3 lifeboats, a few sleds, and the endless white of the Antarctic ice. Shackleton gathered his crew. Panic, he told them, was the real enemy now. They would survive only by discipline, courage, and unity. They set up camp on a drifting ice floe and called it Ocean Camp. Their world had shrunk to tents stitched from sails and crates of frozen supplies. Seal meat, penguins, and a handful of saved rations were all that kept them alive. The nearest rescue was more than 1,000 miles away. Shackleton refused despair. He gave everyone duties, divided the food carefully, and maintained strict routine. He understood that hope was as vital as warmth. When morale faltered, he lifted it, with humor, leadership, and calm authority. He wrote that optimism was a true moral courage. The men endured months of freezing winds and shifting ice. The floes cracked and reformed beneath their feet, turning solid ground into slush. Each time the ice broke, they dragged the lifeboats and supplies to another patch of safety. Sleep came in bursts, haunted by the groaning of distant pressure ridges. Some men collapsed from exhaustion, others fell ill with frostbite and hunger. Once the ship's carpenter challenged Shackleton's authority, claiming that with the ship gone, he was no longer captain. Shackleton's answer was quiet but final. Without order, he said, "We will die." The matter was settled. By April 1916, the ice beneath them began to melt and split apart. The sea was opening, dangerous but promising. Shackleton knew it was time to move. He gave the order. The boats would be launched. The men loaded their remaining gear into the 3 lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills. They pushed off into the freezing black water, rowing through slush and shards of ice. Waves crashed over the sides, soaking them to the bone. At night, they huddled together under soaked blankets, the sky alive with snow and lightning. Then, after days of rowing through storms and exhaustion, they saw it, the outline of land through the fog. Elephant Island. For the first time in nearly 500 days, they stood on solid ground. Some fell to their knees, others wept. They had survived the ice, but they were far from safety. The island was barren, unseen by any ship, and offered no rescue. Shackleton looked across the sea and knew what had to come next. "If help won't come to us," he said, "we'll sail to it." And with that, he began preparing for the most dangerous voyage of his life. Their journey would test the limits of strength, faith, and endurance. And what they found at the end of it would defy all odds. Shackleton's men stood on the stony shore of Elephant Island, shivering in the wind, their faces hollow from months of starvation. They were safe for now, but marooned at the edge of the world. No ships passed this way. If they waited, they would die. Shackleton made his choice. He would take one of the lifeboats and sail for help. The destination, South Georgia Island, 800 miles across the most violent sea on Earth. The lifeboat was small, 22 feet long, patched with canvas and seal's blood to keep it watertight. He named it James Caird. On April 24, 1916, Shackleton and 5 men pushed off into a wall of freezing spray. Behind them, the rest of the crew watched in silence, knowing this was their only chance of rescue. Within hours, the Antarctic weather struck. Waves rose higher than houses, smashing across the deck. Ice formed on the ropes, weighing the little boat down. They bailed water constantly, soaked to the bone, half blind with exhaustion. Frank Worsley, their navigator, caught glimpses of the sun through storms and used them to calculate their course. If he was wrong by even a single degree, they would miss the island completely. For 2 endless weeks, they battled the sea. One man collapsed, another prayed, and Shackleton kept them rowing. He later wrote that their boat was tossed like a cork upon a breaking sea. At last, on May 8th, they saw it. The gray cliffs of South Georgia breaking through the mist. Safety was almost in reach, but one final storm slammed into them, tearing at the sails. The same storm sank a ship 5 times their size. Still, the James Caird survived, battered but afloat. They crashed onto the wrong side of the island, alive yet trapped again. Between them and rescue stood mountains no human had ever crossed. With no map, no proper gear, and nails driven into their boots for grip, Shackleton and 2 men began the climb. For 36 straight hours, they trudged across glaciers and ridges, guided only by instinct and the faint memory of the island's shape. When despair threatened to stop them, Shackleton said he felt another presence walking beside them, as if something unseen refused to let them fail. Then at dawn they heard it, the long whistle of a whaling station, human voices. They staggered down the slope, clothes in rags, faces burned by wind and salt. When they reached the station, a worker stared in disbelief and asked, "Who are you?" Shackleton answered softly, "My name is Shackleton." He wasted no time resting. He immediately began planning the rescue of the men left behind on Elephant Island. 3 attempts failed as the ice closed in again, blocking every approach. But on the 4th, he broke through. On August 30th, 1916, nearly 2 years after the Endurance was crushed, Shackleton finally returned for his crew. As the ship approached the island, the men ran to the shore, waving tattered flags, unable to speak. When Shackleton stepped onto the beach, his first question was simple. "Are you all well?" Frank Wild replied, "All safe." All well. Not one life had been lost. The expedition that began as a dream of conquest ended as one of the greatest survival stories in history. Shackleton's calm, compassion, and determination turned disaster into triumph. A legacy that still defines leadership more than a century later. And a century after that, beneath the same frozen sea that swallowed their ship, the Endurance would rise again, not from the depths, but from memory. More than 100 years after Shackleton's ship vanished beneath the Antarctic ice, a new expedition set out to find her. It was called Endurance 22, organized by the Falklands Maritime Heritage Trust. Led by polar geographer Dr. John Shears and marine archaeologist Menson Bown, the mission gathered explorers, scientists, and engineers from around the world. Their goal was simple in words, impossible in practice: locate a wooden ship lost in one of the harshest, least explored seas on Earth. They sailed aboard the South African icebreaker Agalhus II, equipped with the latest technology, drones, sonar scanners, and autonomous underwater vehicles known as saber-tooths. Each was capable of diving 10,000 feet below the surface, scanning the seafloor in total darkness. Even so, the Weddell Sea offered no mercy. Blizzards swept across the deck, temperatures plunged below -30, and thick ice closed around the ship's hull, just as it had done to Shackleton more than a century earlier. Menson Bound later described those conditions as both terrifying and humbling. "The ice dictates everything," he said. "You don't conquer it, you negotiate with it." For days, the search turned up nothing but shadows and silence. Then after 2 weeks, a sonar ping returned an outline. Curved, symmetrical, unmistakable. A ship. The team guided the underwater robot closer, its light slicing through the darkness. As the first images appeared on the monitor, Menson Bound's voice came through the feed. A mix of disbelief and awe.
Her state of preservation is just absolutely brilliant. The wood is as fresh as the day the ship went down. You can see her paintwork, you can see the bolts, you can see the ship's name, Endurance carved across her stern.
The Endurance was not a ruin. It was a time capsule. Perfectly preserved, her name still carved across the stern, framed by a 5-pointed star. The paintwork remained. The timbers looked untouched, protected by the freezing water and the absence of wood-eating organisms. Even the mast lay across the deck, as if the crew had just stepped away. Menson Bound's voice trembled as he described the site. "The state of preservation is absolutely brilliant. The wood looks as fresh as the day she went down. I've never seen anything like it. So beautiful, so inspiring." For a moment, no one spoke. They had all seen wrecks before: Titanic, Franklin's ships, and others claimed by the sea. But none quite like this. This one seemed alive, watching, waiting. It was as if the Endurance had simply been sleeping, and the century between her sinking and discovery had passed in silence. The team spent days mapping and photographing the site. They did not disturb anything. By international agreement, the wreck would remain untouched, a monument to exploration and survival. The images they captured stunned the world. A wooden ship from 1915, perfectly preserved under 10,000 feet of ice, her name glowing faintly in the deep. The parallels were impossible to miss. In 1915, Shackleton faced the fury of the ice with courage and instinct. In 2022, his successors faced it with technology and science. but the spirit was the same. Both refused to give up. What the Endurance 22 team found wasn't just a shipwreck, it was a message from the past, a reflection of human perseverance. They had proven that even in a world of machines and satellites, true discovery still requires the same thing it always has: endurance. And as the world celebrated the find, one question lingered in the cold silence of the deep. What does the Endurance still have to teach us about the will to survive? The Endurance lies still beneath the Weddell Sea, upright, untouched, and perfectly preserved by the same cold that once destroyed her. More than a century after she vanished, she has become something greater than a wreck. She is a mirror, reflecting what humanity can survive when everything seems impossible. The ice crushed her timbers, but not her name. The ocean buried her, yet guarded her for 100 years until we were ready to find her again. And in doing so, it gave the world back a story that never really ended. Shackleton's men are gone, but their courage remains in every expedition that faces the unknown. Their lesson is simple: success fades, but character endures. The team that rediscovered the ship proved the same truth. That endurance is not just history, it's a way forward. If this story reminded you that courage still matters, subscribe to Depths Uncovered. Each week, we explore the hidden places where history sleeps and the human spirit refuses to. The Endurance may never rise again, but her spirit already has. She is more than a ship beneath the ice. She is proof that even in the coldest depths, hope endures.